Picture this, a hut of straw rattling in the wind, snow piling high outside, and a shepherd pressed against his flock, every breath frosting in the air. In medieval Europe, winter wasn't a season, it was a predator. One freezing night could wipe out an entire family. No furnace, no thick stone walls, no pile of blankets waiting in a closet. Just a thin shell of mud and straw and the stubborn will to last until morning. Most of us today wouldn't survive a single night in those conditions. Yet medieval shepherds did. They endured centuries of brutal winters, not with technology, but with ingenuity. Their tools? Straw, stone, wool, dung, and sheep. Their reward? Survival. The tricks they used were so simple they sound absurd, until you realize they worked. Tricks that kept frostbite at bay, warmed huts with no fuel, and turned animals into living furnaces. Hacks so effective that without them, Europe's rural poor would have vanished into the snow long before history remembered them. Tonight, we're going back 700 years to uncover how shepherds beat death in winter. Tricks that just might save your life if modern comforts failed. The cold didn't just come from the air. It came from the ground. In winter, a dirt floor turned into a frozen slab, leaching heat from every sleeping body. No hearthfire could win against that silent enemy. The answer? Straw. Cheap, ordinary, and everywhere. Shepherds knew that a thick layer of straw on the floor created a barrier between skin and frozen earth. The secret wasn't the straw itself. It was the air trapped inside each hollow stalk. Air resists heat transfer, making straw nature's insulation. Families spread fresh bundles every week. Children carried armfuls from the fields. Parents scattered them across the floor, and the whole hut rose by a few precious degrees. The straw smelled musty. Fleas lurked inside, and it had to be replaced constantly. But it worked. A shepherd's bed was often nothing more than a mat of straw, yet that thin cushion meant the difference between waking up shivering and not waking up at all. Today we buy foam pads or thermal mats. Medieval families lay down their survival one stalk at a time. When firewood was scarce, families turned to stone. Smooth river rocks or bricks were heated in the flames until they glowed with stored energy. Then, carefully wrapped in cloth, they were tucked into bedding, or clutched like primitive hot water bottles. The science was simple but powerful. Stones absorb heat slowly and release it slowly. Even after the fire died, they radiated gentle warmth for hours, carrying families through the coldest part of the night. In northern Germany, records describe peasants sleeping with warmed bricks at their feet. Some towns even built stoves designed solely to heat tiles for nighttime use. Of course, there were dangers. Wet stones could crack or explode when heated too fast. Children risked burns if the wrapping slipped. But careful shepherds learned which rocks to use and how to heat them safely. Modern survivalists use heated water bottles or rechargeable hand warmers. Medieval families used stones and faith in physics they never studied. When the fire went dark, the stones became a second heartbeat in the bed. Sheep were more than wool and meat. They were survival machines. Each animal radiated body heat, and in a hut crammed with people and livestock, that warmth added up fast. Folklore from the Pyrenees describes families placing infants between lambs like living hot water bottles. Parents lay shoulder to shoulder with their flock, letting woolly coats trap warmth and breath thicken the air. The result? A microclimate that could raise the hut's temperature by several degrees, enough to keep death at bay. The downsides were obvious: noise, smell, and fleas. But when the alternative was frostbite or hypothermia, nobody complained. In some regions, shepherd huts were deliberately built with space for animals inside. The flock wasn't just wealth, it was heating. Today, we rely on electric blankets. Medieval shepherds relied on bleeding ones. And in the silence of a storm, the warmth of a living creature was the most reliable heater on Earth. In Iceland, Scotland, and other windswept lands, huts were half buried in the earth. Their walls weren't stone or timber, but blocks of sod, thick layers of grass and soil, cut and stacked like bricks. Inside, the difference was instant. The storm might howl outside, but turf walls breathed with damp, steady warmth. The earth absorbed heat from the fire and bodies within, then released it slowly, like a battery. Archaeologists have uncovered remains of these turf houses across northern Europe, proving the technique wasn't chance, but tradition. Building one was hard work. Families cut sod from pastures, carried it block by block, and packed walls thick enough to stand against the wind. Compared to our nylon tents or plywood cabins, turf huts were marvels of resilience. They didn't look impressive, but they worked for centuries. Families called them home, and storms that might have killed them elsewhere became survivable inside those earthen shells. When wood and stone weren't available, shepherds turned to dung. Yes, animal waste, mixed with straw, shaped by hand, and plastered onto walls. Once dried, it hardened into a solid, insulating layer that sealed out wind and trapped warmth inside. It smelled earthy. It looked crude, but it worked. Across cultures, from adobe in the Middle East to cow dung huts in Africa, this method has kept people alive for thousands of years. Medieval shepherds simply used what their flocks produced daily. Folklore from Scotland recalls families renewing dung plaster each season, layering it over fragile huts while laughing and cursing at the stink. Everyone helped, because everyone depended on it. The walls didn't just block wind. They carried the memory of survival. Today, we spend fortunes on fiberglass insulation and air purifiers. Medieval families plastered manure onto their homes and called it life insurance. When survival was the only goal, even dung became an ally. Forget chainmail and steel. The true armor of a shepherd was wool. Layer upon layer of coarse wool tunics, cloaks, and wraps, pinned tight with a brooch, created a cocoon of warmth. The trick was simple. Layers trap air. More air means better insulation. Even when damp with snow, wool retained heat better than linen or leather. Families spun coarse yarn, stitched heavy cloaks, and passed down pins that sealed cloaks tight against the wind. Medieval illustrations often show shepherds with cloaks clasped at the chest. They weren't dressing for fashion. They were dressing to survive. Archaeologists even note how wool garments from frozen burials show layer upon layer, proving this was no accident. Modern outdoor gear boasts synthetic fleece and high-tech fabrics, but the principle hasn't changed. Shepherds cracked the code centuries earlier. Dress like an onion, trap heat, and never let the cold reach your skin. In parts of Scandinavia and Scotland, houses weren't just for people. They were for animals too. Known as byre houses, these long huts had one side for families and the other for livestock, separated only by a low wall. It was messy, it was noisy, but it was brilliant. Dozens of animals exhaled heat into the shared space, turning a frozen hut into a living furnace. Children often slept closest to the animal stalls, soaking up every degree of warmth drifting through. Archaeological remains confirm these designs, showing clear divisions between human and animal quarters. To us, it seems unhygienic. To them, it was survival math. Humans plus animals equaled life through the winter. Today, we pay thousands for central heating. Medieval shepherds had it too, powered by hooves, wool, and manure. So now you know how medieval shepherds cheated death with straw, stone, wool, dung, and their flock. Hacks that weren't glamorous, weren't clean, but worked. Which trick shocked you the most? Sleeping beside sheep? Smearing dung on the walls? Or carrying hot stones to bed? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed uncovering the forgotten survival science of the Middle Ages, hit like, share this video with a friend who'd never survive a medieval winter, and subscribe for more stories where history meets survival. Because one truth hasn't changed. The next winter is always closer than you think.